Today I've got a tale for you that's heavy with frost and light with second chances. Grief and grit tangled together under the biggest sky you've ever seen, deep in the lawless, beautiful American West. Out here the cold doesn't forgive, but sometimes strangers do. It kicks off with almost nothing. A whisper so faint it nearly drowns in the blizzard, yet loud enough to pull a solitary cowboy off his trail and straight into someone else's broken life. One small sound. One huge turning point. Before we dive deeper, hit like if you're ready for this ride and drop a comment. Where are you watching from today? The blizzard roared in sideways, a furious white wall slashing across the plains, shrinking the whole world to nothing but stinging cold and endless drift. The wind didn't howl, it screamed, clawing at the land like it wanted to scrape every trace of life away. Silas Crowe pulled his hat lower and hunched deeper inside his sheepskin coat, fingers numb and swollen inside frozen gloves. His horse plowed forward through knee-deep powder, each step a labored fight. Steam jetted from the animal's nostrils, vanishing instantly into the storm's hungry maw. They should have turned for home an hour back. But something, call it instinct, call it plain stubbornness, kept Silas moving. A wrongness hung thick in the air, the kind of gut-deep warning that had saved him more than once out here. Then he saw it. A wagon canted half-buried just off the low ridge. One wheel shattered, canvas ripped to ribbons by the gale. At first glance it looked deserted. Then he noticed the shape slumped beside the front wheel. A man, rigid, eyes fixed on nothing, sky blue gone dull and empty. Silas swung down, knees buckling as boots punched through crust. He staggered closer. Death had come quick, or maybe slow, from grief that finally won. No blood, no bullet hole, just the cold claiming what it always claims out here. Silas stepped back and heard it. A small, muffled sound, too faint to travel far against the wind. He spun, squinting through the white fury. In the wagon bed, half drifted over, a corner of wool blanket showed. He yanked the tailgate down and went still. 3 children huddled beneath that thin blanket, frost already rhyming their eyelashes. The girl, maybe 11, blinked up at him slow, like she wasn't sure he was real. The older boy held them both tight, jaw set hard. The littlest one, no more than 5, was pale as chalk, lips split and quivering. The girl tried to speak. No sound came. Silas climbed in, brushing snow off them with quick, careful hands. The air inside reeked of wet wool, fear, and the sharp metallic bite of hypothermia. "Easy now," he said, voice rough, barely louder than breath. "I've got you." The smallest boy clung to his brother's side, staring up with huge eyes. Silas leaned closer, catching the faint whisper. Papa said, "We wait." Silas's jaw tightened. He glanced once at the frozen man lying outside, then back to the child. "You've waited long enough, son," he said quietly. "Come on." He scooped the littlest boy up, wrapped him inside his own heavy coat, and lifted him light as a feed sack. The girl climbed out without a word, one mitten gone, bare hand raw and red. The older boy hesitated, eyes scanning the white hills as though something might still ride out of the storm to claim them. "Move," Silas said, sharper than he intended. The boy gave the drifting snow one last look, then followed. The horse shied hard when the 4 of them appeared, nostrils flaring, eyes rolling white. Silas swung up, the smallest boy tucked warm against his chest. The other 2 walked beside, gripping stirrup leathers to keep from falling in the drifts. They crawled forward, blind and slow. The wind never eased. By the time the first fence post of his place loomed out of the white, Silas was shaking from pure exhaustion, muscles burning. The barn rose like a dark promise of shelter. He dragged the children inside and kicked the door shut. The sudden quiet rang in his ears like a struck bell. He set the littlest one down on a deep pile of hay, struck a match, lit the lantern. Then he started peeling off boots, coats, anything soaked or stiff with ice. When he tugged the girl's mittens free, her fingertips were bleeding. She never flinched, just watched him with those dark, too-old eyes. "Name's Silas," he said at last, draping a thick wool blanket around her shoulders. "You?" "Zephyr," she answered softly. "That's Burl." A nod toward the older boy. "And Alvis is the little one." Burl sat off by himself, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the plank wall like it held answers. "You folks got kin around here?" Silas asked. Zephyr shook her head. "Mama, Elmira, died last spring. Papa was taking us to his brother's place up in Montana. Wagon gave out. He never said the brother's name. Just kept saying we'd know it when we got there." Silas rubbed his jaw, stubble rasping against his glove. No easy reply for that one. He didn't know any Strattons or kin that direction, but families drifted all the time out here. Names changed, trails lost. He glanced at Alvis. The boy had curled tight against the hay, eyes closed now, but his lips still moved, whispering something only he could hear. Silas fetched another blanket from the tack room, tucked it around the child. Then he knelt by the stove, coaxed kindling to flame, built the fire higher until heat pushed back the cold. He hadn't set out to save anyone today. Truth was, he hadn't set out to do much of anything since spring. Since Beulah Thorne walked out without a goodbye, taking his best saddle and the dog he'd raised from a pup. Left behind 4 walls and a silence that settled deep in a man's chest like frost. Now 3 half-frozen strangers filled his barn. And outside, the storm still raged. Silas fed the fire another log and watched the flames climb. Let the gale howl all it wanted. The blizzard gripped the land for 3 full days. By the second, Silas had brought the kids into the main house. The barn had turned so bitter cold the chill seeped right through the logs. Zephyr's cough had started, low and tight, like something caught deep in her chest. Silas cleared the front room, stoked the big cast-iron stove until the metal cherry red glowed. He dragged out quilts he hadn't unfolded since who knew when, thick wool ones smelling faintly of cedar and old summers. The girl never once asked for a thing. She simply got to work, hauling armloads of split pine without a word, feeding the fire, checking on Alvis whenever he stirred and whimpered in the dark. Burl kept close to the door, arms folded, dark eyes following Silas's every move, like he was sizing up a horse that might buck or bolt. Weighing a man by the quiet he carried. Silas knew that look. He'd worn it himself once. On the 3rd morning, the wind finally quit. Silas stepped onto the porch. Boots crunched new powder. The sky opened wide again, soft blue. Clouds stretched thin and pale over the buttes, like the storm had been wrung out and hung to dry. Floorboards creaked behind him. Burl stood there in one of Silas's old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled, arms crossed tight. Still watching. Still waiting. "You don't trust me," Silas said without turning. Burl stayed silent. Silas spat into the snow. "Good. You shouldn't." He stomped back inside, kicked snow off his boots, and found Zephyr at the stove, ladling out a thin broth that was mostly hot water and hope. She passed him a bowl the way she might have done it 100 mornings already. "You got folks?" she asked quietly. "Had a brother up in Dakota," Silas said. "Took a bullet that wasn't his to take." She nodded, slow, like she understood more than the words. Maybe she did. Alvis woke, coughing hard. Silas watched Zephyr smooth the boy's damp hair, whispering low in his ear until the little chest eased, and he settled again. Silas hadn't noticed how much life a house could hold until now. The soft clink of spoons against tin, the sharp pop of pine snapping in the heat, the quiet rhythm of someone else breathing in the next room while they slept. Later, when the sun rose high enough to drip from the eaves and melt the porch steps into slick boards, Burl trailed Silas out to the barn. "You gonna keep us?" The boy's voice came flat, too hard for his ears. He gripped a splitting axe, small knuckles bone white on the handle. "Don't know yet," Silas said. "You gonna run if I don't?" Burl shrugged. "We made it this far." Silas showed him the right way. Let the axe drop clean. Let gravity do the heavy lifting instead of muscling it. It didn't take long before Burl found the rhythm. Swing, crack, breathe. The boy said nothing more. But that night when Silas set his own supper plate on the table, 4 forks lay beside it instead of 1. 2 weeks slipped by. Zephyr took to sweeping the floors without anyone asking. She found a needle and thread, mended the long tear in Silas's coat with tight, careful stitches. At night she read to Alvis by lantern light from an old almanac Silas kept for moon phases and frost dates, turning dry planting tips and rainfall numbers into stories of magic and far-off lands. Burl worked like he'd been born to it, learning quick, listening sharp. Silas caught himself watching the boy sometimes, the way his shoulders squared straighter when he walked the fence line checking wire, or how he'd stop and stare out across the melting snow like he was weighing a big decision. One evening, Silas hauled in a busted saddle from the barn and set it on the kitchen table. "Ever worked leather?" Burl shook his head. "You will now?" They sat side by side in the warm lamp glow, hands moving, punching holes, pulling waxed thread, stitching cracks. The quiet between them wasn't heavy anymore. In a deep hush, Burl spoke. "Papa wasn't supposed to die." Silas kept his eyes on the needle sliding through worn hide. Said nothing. "He knew better than to travel in winter," Burl went on. "But he kept saying we had to move, like something was after us." Silas's hand paused. He looked at the boy. "You think something was?" "Don't know. He never told us." Silas turned that over long after Burl had climbed to the loft to sleep. The frozen face of Bass Calder drifted back to him. Peaceful, almost, like the man had made his choice and held to it until the end. Outside, the snow was giving way. The wind carried a different smell now. Thaw, wet earth, promise. Silas stood in the open doorway a long while, listening to the house breathe. Zephyr's soft humming as she folded quilts, Alvis's steady sleeping breaths, the walls themselves seeming to remember what it felt like to hold people inside. And still the question lingered thick as wood smoke in a closed room. Why had those kids been out there all alone in that killer storm? What had Bass Calder been running from so hard he'd risked everything? If the trail turns here, subscribe for whatever rides in next. The thaw crawled in slow and grudging, leaving the ground slick and scarred, like the whole prairie had woken up stiff and aching. Meltwater traced thin silver lines down the hillsides, cutting fresh paths through the pasture grass still flattened by winter's weight. Silas patched fence posts alongside Burl, boot heels sinking into the soft black mud with every step. The boy worked steady, no grumbling, no slack, just quiet focus. Spring showed up late this far north, but it always showed eventually. Inside the house, Zephyr scrubbed like she was trying to erase every shadow of the year before. She attacked the cast-iron stove with a rag and elbow grease, scoured the plank walls until they gleamed dull, wiped the windows clear of winter's grime. Silas never told her to stop. There was a fire in her eyes when she worked, a fierce, wordless determination, like she was proving to the world, or maybe just to herself, that she could hold things together. They slipped into a rhythm without ever naming it. Silas still rose before first light, walking the property line to check for breaks or wolf tracks. Burl started trailing him, asking few questions but listening hard. The boy had a careful way about him, studying a tool, a horse, even a spoken word before he reached for it, like he knew anything could snap and cut deep if you weren't paying attention. One morning Silas stepped into the yard and found Zephyr at the well, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hauling the heavy bucket up hand over hand. Her thin arms trembled with the effort, but she leaned into the crank like she'd tear the whole rig out of the ground before she'd quit. He crossed the muddy yard. "You don't have to do that." She didn't pause. "If I can carry my brother halfway across a blizzard, I reckon I can haul a bucket of water." Silas gave one short nod. Fair enough. After that, he let her work the garden patch with him. The soil was thin and cold, stubborn as old leather, but she had a touch for it. Gentle fingers that coaxed pale green shoots up through the frost-crusted dirt. Once he caught her kneeling between the rows, lips moving in silent words, like a quiet prayer over the seeds. Alvis started talking more, his voice still raspy and thin from the cold he'd carried, but he shadowed Zephyr everywhere like a small pup. Some evenings he climbed into Silas's lap by the fire, tracing the calloused lines on Silas's big hands with tiny fingers. "Did your mama teach you how to mend things?" he asked Zephyr one night. "No," she said softly. "I figured it out myself." "What about your papa?" Her mouth tightened. He didn't show us much." Silas didn't push. Some doors weren't his to open, but the way she said it, half afraid to speak against the dead, half more afraid of staying silent, stuck with him like a burr in a boot. That night, after the kids were tucked in the loft, Silas stepped outside. The stars burned cold and bright, the moon washing the fields in pale silver. He leaned on the fence rail with a tin cup of weak coffee, trying to recall the last time the night had felt this peaceful, this empty of ghosts. The door creaked behind him. Zephyr slipped out, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. "I can't remember what Mama's voice sounded like anymore," she said. He turned, catching the moonlight along her jaw, the way her bare toes curled against the cold boards, like she still didn't quite trust the earth under her. "That happens," he said. "Time takes things quiet-like." "She used to sing," Zephyr went on, "soft, like she was afraid to wake the dark, and now, it's just gone." Silas drew a long breath. "My own ma made up songs for everything, washing dishes, breaking colts, stacking firewood, drove us half crazy." Zephyr gave a small, crooked smile. "What happened to her?" "Cancer. It took her slow." "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "She loved us fierce. That's more than a lot of folks ever get." They stood side by side in the quiet, letting the night settle around them. Then Zephyr spoke again, voice almost too low to carry. "Do you think he knew? My father, that he was going to die out there?" Silas didn't answer right away. "I think he was doing his damnedest to keep you safe. Right or wrong, that's what he was trying for." She nodded. Her eyes shone wet in the moonlight, but she didn't let the tears fall. "I never even got to tell him I was sorry," she whispered. Silas looked out across the dark land. He knew. They stayed until the night chill drove them back inside. The next day, Burl came tearing up from the road, eyes wide. Silas spotted the dust cloud first. Then the rider. One man on a bay mare, coming slow and deliberate. The kids ducked behind the porch railing. Silas stepped forward, Winchester steady in his hands. The stranger wore a gray wool coat, cut for city streets, but trail-stained now. He lifted one gloved hand in a peace sign. "Name's Axel Stratton," he called. "I'm looking for the Calder kids. Word got around there were 3 of them might have come through this way." Silas didn't lower the rifle. Not yet. Axel Stratton took off his hat as he crossed the threshold, the motion more ritual than politeness. His sharp eyes swept the room in one quick pass. The glowing stove, the kids standing stiff, the neatly patched quilts folded on the backs of chairs, the clean tin plates stacked on the sideboard. When his gaze settled on Zephyr, something flickered there. Maybe recognition, maybe an old memory, but it vanished before Silas could pin it down. "Lord Almighty," Axel said softly. "You're tall now, girl, just like your mama was." Zephyr didn't budge. Alvis ducked behind her legs, peeking out with wide eyes. Burl stayed planted in the corner, arms locked across his chest, every muscle rigid. Silas could feel the air tighten, strung taut like fence wire pulled too hard, the kind of tension that had nothing to do with welcome. Axel cleared his throat. "I rode out the minute I heard. Folks spotted the wrecked wagon up near the pass. Came straight from Custer. You claim you're their uncle," Silas said, voice level. "I am. Elmira, my sister, was their mother." Zephyr's voice came flat and cold. "You never showed up before." Axel shifted his weight, suddenly unsteady on his boots. "That true?" Silas asked, keeping his tone even but leaving no room for dodging. Axel dropped his eyes to the floorboards. "We hadn't spoken in years, real years. After Elmira passed, things got tangled. Base wasn't always easy to track down." Silas waited. Axel glanced up. "We had our differences, sure, but I'd have come sooner if I'd known. Never figured he'd try crossing that high country so late in the season. Damn fool move." Zephyr flinched like she'd been slapped. Silas stepped half a pace forward, voice dropping low and dangerous. "Watch your mouth in front of these kids." Axel nodded quick, eyes flicking to the stove. "Mind if I sit?" Silas didn't answer, but Axel eased into the nearest chair anyway. He pulled a worn bandana from his pocket and mopped sweat from his brow. "I can take 'em," he said. "Got a spread out near the mussel shell. Nothing fancy, but there's a school nearby, neighbors who look out for each other. They'd be safe, better off than holed up way out here." Silence dropped heavy. Then Zephyr spoke, quiet but edged like a fresh-honed blade. "Why now?" Axel blinked. "When Mama got sick, you didn't come," she went on. "When Papa lost the homestead, you didn't come. But now that he's gone, dead or as good as, here you show up." Axel looked like a man who'd taken a gut punch he hadn't seen coming. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear it. Thought they were getting by." "He never said a word about you," Burl cut in, voice hard. "Not one." Axel's shoulders sagged. "I didn't try hard enough. That's on me." Silas watched Zephyr. Her jaw was locked tight, but her hands shook at her sides. She stared at Axel a long beat, then turned her eyes to Silas. "What happens now?" she asked him. Silas didn't answer right away. The fire snapped and popped in the stove. Alvis started crying without a sound, shoulders hitching as he clung to Zephyr's skirt. She dropped to one knee, wrapped him close, and began humming the same half-forgotten lullaby she'd used before, the tune worn thin by time and hard miles. Axel pushed to his feet. "I'm not the enemy here," he said. "They're my blood. I came to do right by them." Silas met his eyes straight. "Doing right ain't something you announce. It's something you stick around and prove. It's something you prove by sticking around day after day." That night Silas sat out on the porch, oil lamp flickering low beside him, Winchester laid easy across his knees. Axel had bedded down in the barn for the night, promising he'd ride out at first light if that's what the kids decided they wanted. "You believe him?" Burl asked, stepping from the doorway into the cool dark. Silas took a slow sip of black coffee. "I believe he means what he says tonight. Whether that holds come morning, we'll see." Burl didn't reply right away. After a stretch of quiet, he said, "He's not what I pictured. All those nights after Mama died, I'd lie awake building him up in my head, some big hero riding in to fix everything." Silas kept his eyes on the star-lit hills. "Most folks end up smaller than the legends we make about them." Burl eased down onto the porch rail. He looked at us like we were strangers he'd just met on the trail. "You are strangers to him," Silas said evenly. "Doesn't mean it has to stay that way." Burl let the silence sit a while longer, then asked, "If we wanted to stay, would you let us?" Silas didn't turn. "I'd let you decide for yourselves." "But would you want us to?" Silas met the boy's eyes then. "Yeah, I would." Burl nodded once, slow and thoughtful. "He's got family out there, you know. Real town. Church bells on Sunday. Neighbors who know your name. A schoolhouse with kids our age." "Sounds nice," Silas said. "But they don't know you. Not the way you've been known these last weeks." Burl looked out into the dark, toward the silvered ridges under the moon. Silas let the question hang between them. "What do you want, Burl?" The boy didn't answer. Maybe he didn't have one yet. But in the stillness that followed, something eased, like a knot finally loosening. Come morning, there'd be choices to make, roads to ride or turn from, promises to keep or break. Silas knew the kids deserved to pick where they put down roots, but he also knew a hard truth. Sometimes the ones who ride up out of the worst storm are the ones worth building a life with. Sunrise crept over the hills, soft and gold, brushing the frost-glazed ground with pale light. Silas was already at the stove, coffee bubbling, biscuits browning in the skillet. He'd never win any prize for cooking, but he could rustle up enough hot food to fill empty bellies and chase the chill away. Zephyr came in first, footsteps light, eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. She poured herself a cup without asking, sat down across from him like she'd claimed that chair years ago. "Burl didn't sleep much," she said. Silas nodded. "You?" She lifted one shoulder. "Some." They didn't need more words than that. Too much hung unsaid already. By the time Burl and Elvis climbed down from the loft, Axel was out in the yard saddling his bay mare. He moved quick and tight, like a man who wanted to be gone before the hard questions could catch up. Zephyr stepped outside first. Elvis clung to her hand, blanket trailing behind him like a faded flag. Silas stayed in the doorway, arms folded. Burl hung back on the porch edge, watching everything. "You leaving?" Zephyr asked. Axel finished tightening the cinch, didn't look up right away. "Not if you don't want me to." "That's not what I asked." He turned then, squinting against the bright morning light. "I didn't ride all this way to take anything from you, just to give you a choice." She studied him a long moment. Then she said, "What kind of man waits till the house is burned to the ground before he shows up with a bucket of water?" Axel's jaw worked, but no words came. She took one step closer. "You didn't even make it to Mama's funeral." He closed his eyes, opened them slow. "You're right, I didn't." Elvis looked up at her, voice small. "Is he bad?" "No," Zephyr said gently. "He's just late." Axel flinched at the word like a slap. "I've got land," he said. "A house that could stand some life in it. Folks nearby who'd lend a hand. A school. A place to grow up proper." Zephyr glanced back at Silas in the doorway. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, just watched her with steady eyes. Burl came down the steps then, not hurrying, not dragging his feet. He walked straight up beside his sister, arms loose at his sides. Burl walked straight up beside his sister, arms hanging easy at his sides. "I think we ought to stay," he said. Zephyr blinked hard. "You sure?" He glanced at Silas, then back to Axel. "We were half frozen to death when he found us. Didn't ask for a dime, just kept the fire going, put food in our bellies, showed me how to swing an axe so I wouldn't chop my own toes off." Axel lifted one brow. "Sounds like he handed you more than just warmth and grub." Burl gave a small shrug. "Yeah, but he never made big promises or tried to own us." A long quiet settled over the yard. Then Axel nodded, voice dropping low. "Well, if you ever change your mind, I'm down past the mussel shell on the South Bend. Ask around for Stratton, won't be hard to track me." Zephyr stepped forward. To Silas's quiet surprise, she wrapped her arms around the man in a quick, stiff hug. Real enough, though it didn't last long. "Tell folks about us," she said. "Tell them we made it through." "I will," Axel answered, voice rough with feeling. He looked down at Alvis. "You look after your big sister, little man." Alvis just nodded, thumb tucked in his mouth the way small boys do when they're fighting tears. Axel swung up into the saddle, turned the bay mare toward the open trail. He rode off without another word, just lifted a hand behind him in a slow wave, like a man saying goodbye to an old chapter he'd never quite finished. That night the house felt different, lighter somehow. Silas didn't talk much. He just set 3 bowls on the table and ladled stew from the pot. Zephyr slid in a loaf of bread she'd baked that morning, crooked and a little scorched on one side, but warm and good. Alvis nodded off right there at the table, cheek mashed flat against the wood. Burl scooped him up gentle and carried him up to the loft bed. After the dishes were scrubbed and stacked, Silas stepped outside, coat slung over one shoulder. Zephyr followed, settling on the top porch step with her knees pulled tight to her chest. "You ever figure your life would turn out like this?" she asked. Silas let out a soft snort. "Not in a million years." She smiled, just a small one. "Me neither." They sat there letting the cool evening air slip in around them, filling the spaces where words weren't needed. After a while, Silas spoke. "You know you can stay here long as you want." Zephyr turned to him, eyes soft in the fading light. "I think we already have." Something passed between them then, a quiet spark, patient and real, in no hurry to be named. Silas stayed still. So did she. But the space between them had changed, softened. Not every truth needs shouting. Some things just take root slow, the way green grass pushes back through after a long winter. Spring arrived in fits and starts, stubborn as a mule. Snow melted off, then drifted back in thin layers. The creek broke free, froze over again, then finally gave up and ran clear. Life didn't burst out blooming. It clawed its way up through thick mud full of promise. Fence posts heaved out of the thawing ground like old bones shaking loose. The house settled into itself too, creaking less, holding warmth longer. Zephyr started marking days in an old notebook Silas had dug out of the bottom of a trunk. Neat lines for planting dates, fence repairs, supply runs. Her handwriting was careful and precise, like she was daring the future to show up again. Alvis trailed her everywhere, always clutching something. A little wooden horse Silas had whittled, a bent spoon, a scrap of calico. He chattered more now, even laughed sometimes in his sleep. Burl worked the land like it had a debt to pay. Silas watched the boy's shoulders broaden day by day, the steady way he handled a shovel or eased rope through his palms around a spooky colt without flinching. A kid turning into a man, one tough sunrise at a time. One morning they were all out in the pasture stringing new wire. Zephyr wiped sweat from her brow and said, "You never told us what you did before all this." Silas leaned on the post-hole digger. "Before what?" "Before you were a fence mender," she teased with a quick grin. "Before you took in 3 half-frozen kids." He thought a second. "Mostly ranch hand. Drifted a bit. Worked spreads up in Wyoming, then down through Colorado. Broke horses. Tried starting my own outfit once with a woman." "What happened?" "She left. Took my good saddle and the best dog I ever had." Zephyr blinked. "That's cold." "She left a note," Silas said. "Said she wasn't built for waiting around." He straightened, stretched the ache out of his back. Guess she wasn't. They went back to work in easy silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling. But the air between them had lightened, like a weight finally lifted off the land after a long freeze. Later that evening, Burl sat out on the porch rail, running a whetstone along the edge of a blade with slow, steady strokes. Zephyr rocked Alvis in the old chair by the window, humming soft under her breath. Silas worked on a loose hinge on the front door. Simple things, everyday fixes that felt good in the doing. Then came the knock. Late, when the sky had gone deep indigo and the first stars were punching through. Silas opened the door, pocket knife still in his grip. A woman stood on the step, dusty coat, face lined with hard travel, maybe early 30s. Something familiar tugged at him in the curve of her mouth, though he couldn't place it. She carried a worn leather satchel and had the weary look of someone who'd walked farther than she'd ever planned. "You Silas Crowe?" she asked. "That's me." She reached inside her coat and drew out a folded letter, holding it out in both hands like it carried its own weight. "I was told to put this in your hands. Said you'd know what to do with it." Silas took it carefully. The paper was creased deep, edges worn soft from miles in a pocket or saddlebag, smudged with trail dirt. He opened it slow, eyes scanning to the signature at the bottom. Bass Calder, the kid's father. Silas read in silence. Zephyr stepped up behind him, reading over his shoulder. When he finished, he passed the letter to her without a word. She took it like it might break, lips moving as she traced the lines. "Silas, if somebody finds this and you come across my kin, do me straight. Keep them safe. I don't expect any man to raise what ain't his own, but I figure blood runs deeper than blood sometimes. They've got nothing left but each other. If I'm gone, and you've got anything left in you to give, help them find their footing. Tell them I was trying. Tell them I didn't leave them. Bass." Zephyr's face folded in on itself, but no tears fell. She just refolded the letter slow and tight, tucking it against her chest like she was putting part of her father back inside her. The woman cleared her throat. "He gave me that back in October. Said if anything went wrong, find you." Silas gave one short nod. "You know him well?" She looked off into the dark yard. "Not well enough, but I knew he loved those kids fierce." Zephyr stepped closer. "Did he say why he pushed out so late in the season?" The woman hesitated. "He said it was about not sitting still anymore. Said he'd made mistakes. Plenty of them. And maybe his kids would stand a better chance somewhere built by a man who hadn't piled up so many." The words landed heavy on Silas's chest, like a sack of wet grain. Zephyr nodded once, slow, as though pieces inside her were finally falling into place. When the woman turned to leave, she carried away more than just her satchel. She left behind a thread drawn taut through everything that had brought these kids to Silas's door. Later that night, after Alvis was asleep in the loft and Burl had climbed up behind him, Zephyr sat at the kitchen table, letter still in her hand. "He did love us," she said quietly. Silas nodded. "Never doubted that for a second." She looked up at him. "Neither did I. I just forgot for a while. They sat there together, the oil lamp burning low, night pressing gentle against the window panes. No need to hash out tomorrow. The future was already taking shape, one quiet breath at a time. Days stretched longer. Winds turned kinder. What snow remained retreated into gullies and north-facing shadows, leaving raw earth behind. Ground hungry for green, promising growth. Things pushed up where no one had sown. Tough little weeds, wild shoots that knew how to live through anything. Silas caught himself humming some mornings, while hauling water from the well or pegging clothes on the line. The sound surprised him the first time, small and ordinary, but he didn't stop it. Didn't think twice about it either. The house wasn't silent anymore. Neither was he. Zephyr started baking before dawn most days. Said the place felt more alive with something warm in the oven. Said the smell helped Alvis sleep deeper. She talked easier now. Not always heavy things. Sometimes just noticing the red-winged blackbirds down by the creek, or how Burrell's boots were getting tight again. She smiled more, too. Sharp and sudden once when Silas tried fixing a busted chair and ended up flat on his back in the sawdust. That laugh stuck with him all day, bright as sunlight on snow. Burrell spent long hours with the cattle, learning their ways, earning their trust one patient move at a time. Burrell had taken a shine to a jittery roan mare that no one else could get near, without her pinning her ears and kicking. Silas watched the boy work her patient and slow, never pushing, never raising his voice, just showing up every single day until she started lowering her head when he approached, until she let his hands rest on her neck without flinching. That quiet patience reminded Silas of Burrell himself. Wound tight as a spring, ready to bolt if you gave him half a reason, but brave underneath, steady when it counted. One afternoon, Silas came in from the barn and found Zephyr at the kitchen table, Alvis fast asleep across her lap. Her fingers moved slow and gentle through the little boy's hair, her gaze far off, lost somewhere in the past. "You know," she said softly, "I used to carry so much anger toward him, toward Papa." She nodded once. "After Mama died, it was like half of him went with her. He turned quiet, wouldn't meet our eyes the same way. I started thinking maybe he wished we'd gone too." Silas didn't speak. He just pulled out the chair across from her and sat, letting the words settle between them like dust after a hard ride. "But he didn't," she went on. "That letter, it's more than ink on paper. It's proof he never stopped trying." "He didn't," Silas said. She lifted her eyes to his. "You think people can really change?" He held her gaze. "I think a lot of them already have. They just haven't noticed it yet." Spring gave way to early summer. The ground firmed up underfoot, no longer sucking at every boot. The seeds Zephyr had pressed into the earth with rough, calloused fingers broke through in stubborn green rows. One morning Silas watched her bent over the garden patch, sleeves rolled high, a streak of dirt across her cheek. She didn't look like an outsider anymore. She looked like she belonged. Rooted, sure, part of the place. That night, Burrell knocked on Silas's doorframe. He held a folded sheet of paper in his hand. Silas took it, opened it slow. A charcoal drawing, 4 figures under a wide tree. An older man, a girl with braids, a boy, and a smaller one between them. Simple lines, but they carried weight. "What's this?" Silas asked. Burrell shrugged, cheeks coloring a little. "I was thinking, maybe we could plant something like that out back. A real tree, a spot to sit under when the work's done." Silas studied the sketch again. "That your picture of home?" Burrell met his eyes. "It's the only one I've got right now." Silas cleared his throat. "We'll dig the hole tomorrow." Burrell nodded and started to turn away, then paused. "I'm glad it was you who found us." Silas watched him go, closed the door quiet behind him, and stood there a long minute holding the drawing like it was something fragile and important. Next morning, the four of them set to work behind the house, near the edge where the pasture met the yard. They planted the young cottonwood Zephyr had been tending for weeks, roots bundled in burlap, leaves still small and tender. Silas held the sapling straight, while Burl tamped the dark soil firm around it. Zephyr poured water from a tin cup, slow and careful, like she was offering a quiet blessing. Alvis stood back, solemn, clutching his own little cup like it was part of the ceremony. When it was done, no one said a word. A light breeze stirred the grass, rustling the new green shoots. The cottonwood shivered faintly in the wind. It didn't look like much yet, but it would. Without thinking, Silas reached for Zephyr's hand. She let him take it, fingers curling warm in his. "Give it time," he said. She nodded. That's all anything really needs. Alvis stepped closer, tipped his head back to look up at the little tree. "What's its name?" he asked. Silas smiled. "How about Hope?" Alvis nodded, serious as a judge swearing in a witness. And there, in the gentle hush of a summer morning, something took root deep. Not just the tree, but all of them together. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories, from our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.